Ladies and gentlemen, the MC's voice sparkled over the mic. Tonight's celebration has been made possible by a very generous, very mysterious guest. A benefactor who wanted to remain unnamed until now. The ballroom stilled. Forks paused midair, champagne glasses frozen in fingers. I glanced at Daniel, my brand new husband, his smile tightening at the corners. His parents leaned forward, eyes glittering with anticipation, already rehearsing their gracious nods. I knew that look. Elaine Carter loved nothing more than to be publicly praised. She perfected it at gallery openings, charity auctions, even brunches. And then, almost as if the MC had given them permission, they began to whisper. "It was us, of course," Elaine said loudly to her sister across the table. Thomas insisted, "Didn't you, darling?" Thomas puffed his chest. "Well, nothing is too much for our Daniel. And Grace deserves to feel like family." The word family landed sharp. They had said it often, but always with the faintest question mark, as if my modest background didn't quite qualify. My dress was elegant but simple, my bouquet chosen for meaning, not for Instagram. They'd once joked, thinking I couldn't hear, that I was bringing down the average net worth of the Carters. So I sat there, heat crawling up my neck, watching them bask in whispers that weren't even confirmed yet. My hands clasped in my lap, fingers cold despite the summer evening. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a silent "don't mind them." But how could I not? I grew up in Tacoma, the daughter of Robert Miller, who spent most of his life on the factory floor. Our house smelled of laundry soap and fried onions, our vacations were road trips in a second-hand van, and birthdays were sheet cakes with names written in shaky frosting. Modest. Ordinary. Honest. Daniel grew up in Mercer Island, in a house where the driveway could host 3 imported cars without feeling crowded. His father flipped commercial properties, his mother curated art. They loved appearances, crystal stemware, matching luggage, catered garden parties. They weren't cruel to me, not outright. But every compliment carried a barb. So refreshing to meet someone who doesn't care about labels, dear. You're so grounded, it must be freeing not to think about investments. Daniel was different. He hated the posturing, the way money became a personality in his parents' mouths. He preferred hiking boots to leather loafers, ramen nights on my couch to black tie galas. That was what I clung to, that Daniel wasn't like them. But on this night, my wedding night, I watched his parents lean into the spotlight that wasn't theirs. The MC drew out the pause, letting suspense grow. Around us, guests murmured. "Of course it's the Carters," one woman whispered. "Who else?" Another chuckled. "You can see it all over them, they're dying to take the credit." My stomach tightened. My father wasn't even in the room yet, delayed, he'd said, traffic. He promised he wouldn't miss the first dance, but I hadn't seen him. I thought he'd slip in quietly. He always did. The MC finally smiled. "And now, please welcome to the floor, the guest who made tonight possible." Every eye swung to Thomas and Elaine. Elaine smoothed her dress, Thomas adjusted his cufflinks, both half rising from their chairs. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. And in walked my father. For a heartbeat, no one recognized him. Not in that tailored navy suit, not stepping out of a gleaming black Aston Martin parked just beyond the doors. He'd shaved clean, shoes polished, tie a deep silk red. His posture was proud, his eyes bright. "Robert Miller," the MC announced. "Father of the bride." Gasps scattered through the room. A few guests clapped automatically. I stood frozen, my heart rattling against my ribs. My father, who had spent decades in oil-stained coveralls, who smelled of metal and soap, looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. He took the mic, cleared his throat, and his voice carried steady. "I couldn't sit and listen to rumors. This day belongs to my daughter and her husband. And yes, I paid for this wedding. Every flower, every light, every note of music. Not the Carters. Me." The room went electric. Elaine's smile collapsed. Thomas went stiff. Daniel's hand tightened around mine in shock. And how? My father continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd. Not by flipping buildings. Not by galleries. I worked. I saved. And 10 years ago, I bought Bitcoin and Ethereum when they were worth pennies. I held on. I believed. And today, he paused, the silence thick as velvet. Today I've made over $100 million. A wave of murmurs surged. People gasped, some laughed in disbelief. Cameras rose like a field of periscopes. And all of it, my father said, looking straight at me, is my gift to my daughter. To Grace. To her future. I trust her with it, because she has what money cannot buy, integrity. I felt tears sting my eyes, my throat lock. The ballroom erupted, half applause, half stunned chatter. Daniel turned to me, eyes wide, his hand trembling in mine. The truth was out. And for the first time that evening, I wasn't small. I wasn't the poor bride. I was Robert Miller's daughter. And the Carters had nothing left to boast about. When Daniel and I first met, it wasn't at a gala or on some curated family vacation. It was at the university library in Seattle, 2 aisles apart, both of us reaching for the same book on urban sociology. His sleeve brushed mine, and he smiled like he had no idea how good-looking he was. Not rehearsed, not polished. Just a smile that said, "I see you." We talked for an hour in the stairwell, books unopened, about cities and people and why money never fixes loneliness. I didn't know who his parents were until weeks later, when he invited me to Mercer Island for dinner. The Carter house was the kind of place you see in glossy magazines, sweeping windows, a piano no one played, a driveway lined with imported sedans. His father, Thomas, greeted me with a handshake that measured more than welcomed. His mother, Elaine, looked me over the way people scan a price tag. "So, Grace," she said sweetly over salad, "your parents are..." "My father works in manufacturing," I said. "Mom passed away when I was 16. "Oh," she replied, eyebrows lifting, then lowering with sympathy that tasted faintly of vinegar. "That must have been difficult. But how inspiring that you've found your way." She meant well, maybe, but the tone was clear, I was not their equal. Still, Daniel never wavered. He visited Tacoma, sat at our worn kitchen table, ate my dad's meatloaf without flinching at the chipped plates. He liked my father, actually. Said he was real. They'd watch baseball together, argue about trades, laugh in a way that had nothing to do with money. But around his parents, the differences always showed. Elaine once spent 20 minutes describing her new $600 toaster to me, as if it were art. Thomas bragged about a business deal that netted him a cool $50K while I silently calculated how many months of rent that could cover. When Daniel and I got engaged, the Carters hosted a small gathering of 80 people. Elaine toasted with champagne so expensive the cork alone looked gilded. "Our Daniel has always had impeccable taste," she said, eyes flicking to me. The applause was polite, but her smile was the headline, gracious, benevolent, superior. I didn't mind being different. I wore thrifted dresses with pride. My father taught me that dignity doesn't come from price tags. But in their world, every object became a yardstick. Elaine once complimented my shoes, then whispered to her sister, "Isn't it quaint how she doesn't bother with designer?" The whispers followed me everywhere. At the rehearsal dinner, one guest leaned across the table and asked, "So how are you paying for the wedding, Grace? Did the Carters step in?" I smiled politely, dodging. Daniel squeezed my knee under the table, a silent apology for things he couldn't control. Truthfully, the wedding costs had been a quiet miracle. My father insisted on helping, though I argued. "Dad, you've worked enough for me already." He only smiled, cryptic, and said, "I've planned for this day longer than you know." I thought he meant he'd saved a little. I didn't press. The morning of the wedding, Elaine swept into the bridal suite like a queen surveying her kingdom. She kissed my cheek, airlight, and said, "Darling, doesn't it feel magical knowing you'll never have to worry about money again?" I bit my tongue. I wanted to say I'd never had money, and somehow I'd managed to live, to love, to build. But I smiled, because it was my wedding day, and I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me small. Still, all through the ceremony, through vows and photographs and our first dance, I felt the hum of something unsaid. Their eyes on me, their whispers in corners. Pride and pity, tangled like vines. And then the MC made the announcement about the mystery guest. I knew, in that instant, that Elaine would seize the credit like oxygen. And she did. What none of us knew, what none of us could have imagined, was that the man they dismissed as blue-collar had been holding a secret for 10 years, a secret larger than all their gallery openings and real estate flips combined. By the time dinner was served, the rumors had swollen like a storm cloud. Everywhere I turned, I caught the edges of sentences. Of course the Carters covered it, who else could afford? Elaine always spares no expense, she told me about their wine cellar. Grace must be so grateful, coming from, well, you know. I tried to focus on Daniel, on the warmth in his eyes, but each whisper felt like a pinprick through silk. They weren't just questioning who paid for the flowers and the music. They were questioning me, my worth, my place at the table. Elaine leaned back in her chair, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's glow. "It was nothing," she said to a cluster of cousins. "Truly, we wouldn't dream of letting Grace's family worry about bills. This is Daniel's day. He deserves the very best." My cheeks burned. My father wasn't even in the room yet, delayed by traffic, and already his love for me, the sacrifices he had made, was being rewritten as their generosity. I wanted to shout the truth, but what truth did I have? As far as anyone knew, Robert Miller was just a factory man from Tacoma. Daniel noticed my silence. He squeezed my hand under the table. "Ignore them," he whispered. But his parents' voices were louder than whispers. They filled the room with a performance only they could applaud. Then the MC tapped the microphone, his grin wide, his words ringing clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Tonight, we honor a very special guest. Someone who insisted on anonymity until now. This entire evening has been a gift, paid for by one generous soul. Let's welcome them to the floor." The spotlight swung. The room hushed. Elaine straightened, her face glowing with anticipation, Thomas pushing his chair back, ready to bask. I swear I heard someone gasp, "It's the Carters," before the doors even opened. But it wasn't them. The double doors creaked wide. And there he was, my father. For a heartbeat, I didn't recognize him. He wasn't in his work boots or plaid shirt. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, silk tie knotted just right, shoes that gleamed with quiet power. His silver hair was combed back, his posture proud. Behind him, through the open doors, a sleek black Aston Martin idled at the curb, headlights like watchful eyes. The room gasped. Forks clattered against plates. Even Daniel blinked in shock. Robert Miller, the man the Carters had politely dismissed for years, walked forward with the ease of someone who finally belonged. He accepted the microphone from the MC, his hand steady. "I couldn't sit back and let rumors run wild," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "This wedding was paid for by me. Not Thomas. Not Elaine. Me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the front clapped nervously. Elaine's smile cracked, Thomas froze, his hand half raised as if caught stealing applause. My father glanced at me, and his eyes softened. Then he turned back to the guests. "Most of you know me as a factory worker. That's true. I worked with my hands, and I was proud of it. But what no one knows is that 10 years ago, I invested what little I had in Bitcoin and Ethereum, back when people laughed at it. I held on. I believed. And now," he paused, the room hanging on his words. "Now I've made over $100 million. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, laughter, cameras flashing like lightning. A murmur of disbelief ran through the tables. And tonight, he continued, lifting his chin, I give it all to my daughter. Every dollar. Because true wealth isn't in what you flaunt. It's in what you pass forward. The silence after that felt holy. I covered my mouth, tears stinging hot. Daniel squeezed my hand, his face stunned, proud, humbled all at once. The Carters? They had nothing to say. Not a whisper left. For a long, fragile moment, the ballroom stayed hushed, like a collective breath waiting to see what would happen next. My father stood tall in the spotlight, the microphone still warm in his hand. Then the applause came, hesitant at first, then rolling into a storm of claps and cheers. Guests rose to their feet, cameras flashing, voices buzzing. I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap. My father, the man who fixed broken sinks with duct tape, who packed sandwiches in wax paper, who once worked double shifts just to cover my braces, was suddenly the wealthiest man in the room. No one had seen it coming. Least of all me. Daniel leaned toward me, his lips close to my ear. Grace, did you know? His voice held awe, not accusation. I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks. Not a clue. At the far table, Elaine's painted smile had collapsed entirely. She whispered furiously to Thomas, her hands fluttering like wings trapped in a cage. He stared at my father with a tight jaw, the way men do when they realize their entire script has been ripped away. One of Elaine's sisters, always eager for gossip, leaned in and stage whispered, so all those stories about your generosity, they weren't true? The question cut through the air like a knife. Heads turned. Guests waited. Elaine stammered, well, of course we helped in other ways, the flowers, the coordination. Her voice trailed off when a cousin muttered, funny, I thought Grace handled that. My father handed the mic back to the MC and walked toward me. The crowd parted, whispers chasing him like shadows. He knelt beside my chair, not caring that his new suit creased, and took my hand. I didn't tell you, he said softly, just for me, because I wanted you to know me as the man who raised you, not the number in an account. But I won't let anyone steal your dignity, Grace. Not here. Not today. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. I simply threw my arms around him, feeling the unfamiliar fabric of his suit but the familiar strength of his embrace. The MC, sensing the electricity in the room, lifted the mic again. Well, what a remarkable gift, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give another round of applause for Mr. Robert Miller, father of the bride. The room erupted once more, though this time I caught sidelong glances, admiration mixed with shock, respect tangled with envy. At the Carter table, things unraveled quietly but visibly. Thomas forced a thin smile whenever someone looked his way, nodding stiffly as if to say, yes, of course we knew. Elaine dabbed her lipstick nervously, her hands trembling. She leaned toward a cousin, whispering too loudly, well, anyone can get lucky with those crypto things. Luck, my father said suddenly, overhearing as he passed. His voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. Luck is a lottery ticket. I worked. I studied. I believed when people called me a fool. That isn't luck, Elaine. That's faith and patience. The cousin smirked into her wineglass. Elaine flushed scarlet, caught in her own performance. The music started again, but the atmosphere had shifted. Guests approached my father, shaking his hand, congratulating him, congratulating me. Suddenly, people who had looked past us earlier now wanted to know everything. When did you buy? How did you hold on? What's your strategy? He smiled politely, giving only brief answers. Discipline. And knowing what matters. Then, without fail, he gestured toward me. She matters more. Daniel held me close on the dance floor. They'll never look down on you again, he murmured. But I shook my head. It's not about them looking down. It's about me looking straight ahead. For the rest of the night, the Carters shrank in their seats. Their bragging, their subtle digs, their little performances, it all seemed so small now, like children boasting about toy cars in the shadow of a real engine. And I? For the first time, I stood tall without apology. Not because of money, not because of spectacle, but because the truth had been spoken into the microphone, loud enough for the whole world to hear. I was not the poor bride. I was Robert Miller's daughter. And they could never take that away. The morning after the wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications stacked like confetti, texts, emails, social media tags. Clips of my father's speech had already gone viral in our circles, shaky phone videos capturing his calm announcement, his confession of crypto millions, the stunned silence that followed. Headlines bloomed across Facebook feeds, factory worker turned millionaire stuns daughter's wedding. Friends from college, old co-workers, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years messaged, all with some version of the same question, did you know? No. I hadn't known. But the whole world knew now. Daniel and I sat in the hotel suite, the remnants of wedding cake still boxed on the counter. He scrolled his phone, shaking his head. They're eating this up, he said, showing me a thread of comments praising my father for his humility. Someone even called him the blue-collar Buffett. I laughed, still half-dazed. Dad would hate that comparison. He never cared about fame. Only security. Still, Daniel said softly, pulling me into his arms. You should be proud. He gave you the world last night. I was. But pride came with a heaviness too. The Carters hadn't texted, hadn't called, hadn't even posted a perfunctory congratulations. For a family addicted to appearances, their silence was deafening. 2 days later, Daniel and I visited my father. His Tacoma house looked the same from the outside, modest, brick-sided, a bit weather-worn. But inside, everything gleamed. He'd redone the kitchen quietly, new counters, polished appliances. He poured us coffee in simple mugs, the same ones I'd grown up with. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, he said, sliding a mug toward me. Embarrassed? I shook my head. Dad, you saved me. You gave me back my dignity. His eyes softened. That's all I ever wanted. You think I cared about the Carters? About their whispers? No. I cared about the way you kept shrinking when they talked. I couldn't watch my daughter get smaller on her own wedding day. Daniel reached across the table, clasping my father's hand. You gave her more than dignity. You gave her power. My father exhaled slowly, then stood. He returned with a leather folder, heavy and precise. He laid it on the table, pushed it toward me. What's this? I asked. Papers, he said simply. Legal transfer. Trust accounts, wallets, real estate I converted last year. It's all yours now, Grace. My breath caught. Dad, what? All of it? You can't. I can, he said firmly. And I want to. I built this for you, not for me. I've lived my life. You're the future. Tears blurred my vision. But why reveal it now? Why not keep it secret, quiet, like you always did? He leaned back, folding his hands. Because money means nothing if it doesn't protect what you love. They tried to take that from you. Tried to make you feel lesser. I won't let anyone write our story for us again. The Carters called eventually. Elaine's voice was brittle over the phone. Grace, we didn't realize your father was so comfortable. We only wanted what was best for you. Best for me, I repeated, my voice flat. Or best for your reputation? Silence. Then a hasty, we'll talk when you're back from the honeymoon. But we never did. From that day forward, the Carters kept their distance. At holidays, they were polite but cold, their once constant commentary reduced to tight smiles. They couldn't rewrite the wedding, couldn't erase the moment my father had shattered their illusion. So they withdrew, licking their wounds in private. Daniel didn't flinch. He told me often, their pride isn't ours to carry. And he was right. For the first time, I felt free of their shadow. Months passed. Life reshaped itself. My father moved into a new home, not a mansion, but a bright, modern place with a garden he tended every morning. He donated anonymously to the factory where he'd once worked, funding scholarships for workers' kids. He set up clinics in Tacoma, paid off medical debts for families like ours. And me? I became the steward of a fortune I had never imagined, and yet, in my father's eyes, had always deserved. At first it was overwhelming, numbers and accounts, lawyers and advisors. But I remembered his words, discipline and patience. I learned, I listened, I chose carefully. Not long after, I started my own foundation, small at first, then growing, focused on giving opportunities to girls from working-class families. Scholarships, mentorships, startup grants. I named it the Integrity Fund. Every time I signed a check, I thought of my father's hands, calloused and tired, and the way he'd pass me the folder across the table. Sometimes I replay the wedding in my mind, that precise moment when the doors opened and my father walked in, transformed. It wasn't just the suit, the car, or the millions he revealed. It was the way he looked at me, as if to say, "You are not less. You never were." Money can buy chandeliers and champagne, sure. But what my father gave me that night was more enduring, truth spoken aloud, dignity restored, love made public. And when he handed me his fortune, he wasn't giving me just numbers. He was giving me a mission. A legacy. So if you ask me now who paid for my wedding, I'll tell you this. It wasn't the Carters with their polished boasts. It wasn't luck falling out of the sky. It was Robert Miller, my father. A man who worked with his hands, believed when others mocked, and chose to turn quiet sacrifice into a thunderclap of love. And now, every decision I make with his gift is my way of holding the mic he once held, looking the world in the eye, and saying, "This is my daughter. And she is enough."